Hello and welcome. Today I would like to present you our horizon scan performed by early career researchers for vegetation science. I'm talking on behalf of this list of really cool co-authors, and let's move into the presentation. So the context of this exercise was thinking on how climate change, habitat loss and fragmentation, as well as invasive species and pollution are some of the most important components of global change. And we know now that they act as major drivers of biodiversity loss worldwide. And because this is affecting us right now, but also obviously will continue to affect us in the future, we started thinking, what are the challenges and opportunities for vegetation science in the next 20 years? And we thought that it will be very good to have this exercise done by young researchers who are going to be the future of the field as well. A previous effort in these lines was done by the chief editors of Journal of Vegetation Science in 2019, where they analyzed the trends over the past 3 decades, and they thought about, based on the trends of the past decades and the new publications that are coming in all the time, they started thinking about the new horizons of the field for the next 10 years. But we thought that maybe a horizon scan for the field was needed, and it will be a more interesting exercise, bringing not only the things that are maybe published in the Journal of Vegetation Science, but maybe some other things that could come to the field. Horizon scans are by now a widely used tool. It has been perhaps most known for conservation. So the effort led by William Sutherland, that I think it's around 10 years now that they are doing this for conservation almost every year. But it also has been done for other fields like invasion science. This, however, has not been done for vegetation science so far. This was part of one of the activities from the IIVS Young Scientists Working Group last year. So we first opened a call for anyone who was a young scientist and interested to submit a topic that they consider will be an emerging challenge or opportunity for vegetation science in the next 20 years. And once we selected some of these applicants, we asked them to elaborate on their topics, and to the ones that were more experimented, so the ones that had already, for example, a PhD, to provide one more topic so we will have enough to discuss. Then the topics were reshaped and combined if needed, and we had a final list of 24 topics. We sent these topics to all participants, and we asked them to rank them from 1 to 24 in order of importance for them. And this list was discussed on the first day of the workshop, so everyone had the opportunity to argue for the importance of some topic that was not making it up in the list. And then all participants had another opportunity to rank them again. By the end of the workshop, we discussed on the topics that we selected, and saw if there were some people who still thought that there was a need for a further ranking or further combination. And as it was not, we selected 15 topics, and this was the final selection. This effort was also sent to publication, in which one of our reviewers pointed out that it would be important to frame more topics also within the aims of vegetation science. So we would have to define more clearly the aims of vegetation science. So we did so for our publication, and we defined it in these 4 points. The first one related to understanding processes affected or affecting vegetation, describing patterns at different ecological and temporal scales. And one of the most important things that we think came out of this effort was to try to integrate different knowledge systems and foster interdisciplinarity approaches to advance the field, and also communicate scientific findings in a manner that not only highlights the role of vegetation science as a critical cornerstone for conserving biodiversity, but also trying to nurture this fascination for plants and interest of people in the field to collaborate also in the advancing of the field. So using these aims that we define for vegetation science, we also specify how our topics would advance each one of these ones. In this figure here, you can see the like a summary of the final 15 topics selected, and in the little symbols here, which one, of course, not every topic advances every goal or aim we set for vegetation science. So some of them only 2 or 3 or 4. I'm not gonna get into the details now because of time, but this is summarizing which ones they are advancing, and this was explained as well. And we also separated the topics in a kind of artificial way, but how we thought which topic will advance maybe the new frontiers and types of data. So how it would advance the field by, for example, bringing us new types of data or improving prediction or advancing research and policy making. Of course, some of these are not necessarily only constrained to new types of data and nothing else, but we thought, okay, by classifying in the major contributions they may have within this classification, it will be more clear. Diving right into our results, in terms of new horizons and type of data for the field, next generation sequencing is very promising. It's getting easily accessible nowadays. It allows us to not only explore genetic variation within plant species, but also to unveil hidden diversity and so far hidden interactions with soil microbial communities, for example. So it's probably going to continue developing in the future. Using plant spectral properties to explore vegetation patterns and processes across spatial-temporal scales. This also is a very promising tool that, combined with remote sensing advancement, can substantially contribute to improving the monitoring of biodiversity. And integrating risk surveying studies and permanent plots for a regular assessment of long-term ecosystem changes and stability is very needed now in the context of global change. In particular, permanent plots allows us to capture nonlinear responses of community composition and function, so they're very important. Another topic that came out was novel ecosystem and how they are an opportunity to understand the effects of global change. So we need to move a little bit further away from just trying to study this more pristine ecosystem and embrace novel ecosystem to understand this. And other very important ones are urban environment. They're very promising also for the future. Pollination interaction, incorporating them into vegetation studies was also one of the topics. So although they are very important for the survival of both the plant and pollinator species, they are often disregarded. Obviously, these are not the only mutualistic interactions that are disregarded, but this is the one that came out in our horizon. But we should also consider other mutualistic interactions, of course. There was also the idea that we need to really put more effort into incorporating below ground traits or below ground aspects. So we tend to focus a lot on above ground traits patterns to try to explain vegetation. But if we leave this big part, we might be losing a big picture of what's happening there. And there is more and more information coming out in databases nowadays. In terms of improving predictions in the field, one topic that came out was the need for more fine spatial temporal resolution of near surface microclimatic data. This is very needed for more accurate modeling. Also, to move away from this correlative species distribution modeling, and given the amount of big data that we have now, that would allow us for a better parameterization of process-based range models for global change research. We can use these same models for a more accurate predictive restoration in the future. So we know that the environmental situation will be quite unpredictable, but you can use this model to have simulations of different like a large number of candidate species and see which ones will perform better under different scenarios. In terms of research and policy advancement, classification stability came as one of the topics. So although we have made a lot of advancement in Europe, for example, this is not so in the rest of the world. And this is very important in terms of conservation for example, specific vegetation types or habitats. And this should be promising because we do have more vegetation databases, larger ones, and we also have more computing processing power, so this should develop in the future. Another topic was halting forest degradation, but also combining it with more targeted restoration of forest in prioritized ecosystems. So this is also in response to many calls for just planting trees throughout the world. It's very important that vegetation science is also helping for more precise restoration targets here. Evaluating the effectiveness of protected areas in conserving plant communities was also a very important topic. This has to do with evaluating the effectiveness of protected areas based on pre-established biological outcomes that have been reached or not. And this requires long-term data. So this is also associated with our previous topic explained about the permanent plots. So disentangling climate change impacts when we are performing vegetation monitoring in understudied areas is quite important. Many of these understudied areas, unfortunately, are also very rich, so very needed to be monitored and protected, but we don't have very often we don't have enough information. So many of the tools that are mentioned or were mentioned before in this horizon scan could help us disentangle what are the impacts of climate change or other human-driven activities on biodiversity. Another topic that came out that is very, very important is this managing vegetation through the integration of traditional ecological knowledge into not only the research, but also public policy. So we need to move away from this studying ecosystems or vegetation from this pristine perspective and acknowledge that many of these lands have been traditionally used and still are by humans, and so we need to incorporate them into the research as well. This is particularly important for conservation. Also, from a social perspective, another topic that came out was embracing public dialogue to increase the relevance and robustness of science. So this is not only including the people so only the stakeholders, but also people to participate in the production of science, also for people to trust the science as well. And this should also be incorporated not only into research, but also teaching, for example. So all of these topics, of course, were framed within vegetation science, but can also contribute to addressing shortfalls in biodiversity knowledge or answering fundamental questions related to ecology. We also put these topics into the perspective of the 100 fundamental ecological questions. So this is a paper published in 2013, but unfortunately I cannot get into this so much right now. We also had similarity with horizon scans for conservation. For example, the one that was done in parallel with us also identified the issue about planting trees as a way to mitigate climate change and how we have to be careful with what we plant there. DNA sequencing technologies also emerged as a promising tool in 2019. And older scans already anticipated that data from satellites and remote sensing will become more available and more important for monitoring changes. So with this contribution, we identified topics that we expect will emerge or gain momentum in the next 20 years for the field, tools that can help us overcome common challenges. And then we also look to try to bring a voice to people that are not usually represented in this type of effort from different continents, but also in terms of gender representation. I would like now to thank all the institutions that have provided funding, and also Professor Jonathan Jeschke for his suggestions and advice on logistics, and the women's representative at my department for providing financial support for childcare during Germany's lockdown, which was very important. Thank you.